Hello and welcome to World Talks. My name is Sasha Farbach. Ursula von der Leyen insists there are pretty precise plans for EU troop deployments to Ukraine, while Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, has fired back that it's fundamentally wrong to even discuss such moves before peace talks. Now, that contradiction sets the stage for a critical debate on Europe's role, America's backing, and Ukraine's future security. And joining us now to discuss it is Scott Lucas, professor at University College Dublin, to get into it further. Good to have you back on TVP World. Good morning.
Well, thanks to you and your great viewers.
Scott, let's start with this contradiction here. Von der Leyen is pretty clear she has some sort of plan ahead, very much a different view from the German defense minister. What do you make of this contradiction here? How do you reconcile these two?
Well, I think there's two ways to do this. I think the first is that what the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, was saying on Monday, following von der Leyen's comments on Sunday, is don't talk about these plans while they're still under development. Don't make this public. Von der Leyen went high profile in an interview when she said that potentially tens of thousands of European troops would be deployed, supported, importantly, by the Americans, talking about, for example, about American intelligence, about American logistics, about American engineering, and about American air power. But I think the second aspect is reconciled by this. I think you're not talking about European troops being deployed inside Ukraine while the Russian invasion is still ongoing. That simply just risk an escalation into a wider war. The Germans have always said that they are concerned about that. It is far different to be talking about the deployment of Europeans after a ceasefire is agreed. But of course, we're in this area right now where the Kremlin is refusing to accept a ceasefire and is indeed stepping up its attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Von der Leyen was not clear enough on Sunday that she was talking about these plans for deployment of European troops after the ceasefire rather than in the current state of the conflict.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I mean, another voice to this is the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who also, on an interview with the German broadcaster ZDF, has very much also said similar veins, which are potentially also concerning, saying no one is talking about ground troops in Berlin. So again, this message. So where are we really with these plans? And we've been talking about security guarantees, but now the words from the Chancellor also sound a little bit like he's backing off. What do you interpret there?
Well, I think it's important to clarify that when we are talking about the deployment of European forces inside Ukraine, we're not talking about the deployment of European forces on the front line, for example, in the east or in the south. We're talking about European forces in essentially being in a support role. There will be Ukrainian troops that, of course, have to monitor that front line because of a ceasefire. But the Europeans, for example, will be protecting Ukrainian facilities in the west of the country. But again, I think the broader point here is that the Germans are saying it is too early to be talking in detail in public about where we are with this. Where exactly are we? You may remember, you're showing the fact images of it, this high-profile meeting on August 18th of Vladimir Zelensky and the European leaders with Donald Trump, 3 days after Trump met Putin. Now, importantly, Zelensky and the European leaders were able to get Trump back onto the message that security guarantees were needed. The day after that meeting took place, U.S. military leaders, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, had a video conference with Ukrainian and European colleagues. So the militaries are discussing what type of plans you could have in place if there's a ceasefire, but they are only discussing the military options at this point. The political confirmation of this is still some ways off.
Mm-hmm. We're often discussing the last days and weeks, really, this what could happen? And again, security guarantees also, I think if you ask various people what that actually entails, we've had various information what that could be, sources from the White House apparently that the Americans are ready to support some kind of command control structure with intelligence. But I suppose here, are we anywhere closer to, in any sort of shape, as we said, what security guarantees would really look like? I know we've got that coalition of the willing meeting coming up this week on Thursday. Are we going to get more tangibles, or at what point does this become tangible so we know what's really going to happen?
I think we're moving towards security guarantees, but I think it's a process that'll take time. And again, I come back to the fundamental that the discussion of security guarantees right now is premised on the idea that there's a ceasefire. So I think focusing on this as the top issue while keeping an eye on it is not really the key point, including looking at the coalition of the willing this week. What is the key point in the near future? Well, let's look at it. First of all, it's maintaining Ukraine's defense against the 42-month full-scale invasion. And where have we had advances in that? That you have had the United States make its commitment to selling Ukraine essential weapons, including air defenses, via NATO members. Secondly, we're talking about the question of coordination of financial aid to support Ukraine at a time when there's great pressure on the Russian economy, but you don't want Ukraine to break because it can't keep the government going. Well, again, I think Europe in particular has stepped up for that. And thirdly, it is sanctions. And the Europeans were discussing their 19th package of sanctions on Ukraine. But importantly, and the U.S. administration split over this, I will emphasize that. But importantly, the talk of U.S. sanctions on Russia and its trading partners is back on the table through the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who said that in an interview yesterday. So I think it's that question of if Russia continues the bombing of Ukrainian civilians, if it's not going to cease fire, do we get this escalated economic pressure? That's a more important discussion in the short term rather than that just of security guarantees, which is a longer term issue.
Mm-hmm. Interesting you mentioned there that the future of this lies very much through economic pressure. What do you make of it? I mean, we've just concluded this Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the SCO, 20 countries meeting there in China. We have those images from yesterday with Modi out of India, Xi Jinping close by, Putin there. When you saw those images, just briefly, what do you make of that? I mean, is there, let's say, hope that there can be some kind of alignment here? Is there fear there can be an alignment here between these powers? Now, what Trump is doing, I mean, these large countries meeting, that certainly can't be good for the other side of the world where we're trying to get them really to put pressure on Putin.
Yeah, well, it's nice for the cameras, and you're going to see the photos and the video on Russian outlets 24/7. But I think it's important to distinguish between a strategic alignment and tactics here. Let's talk about the tactics. Russia needs to show it has friends. Russia is largely isolated economically and politically in the international community because of the invasion. More importantly, look at the trading partners. China is signaling, look, we're not going to abandon the Russians economically. We're not going to stop buying Russian oil. We're not going to stop trading with it, despite what noises are made by the United States. Amid, it should be remembered, the U.S.-China talks on the future of tariffs. And India, I think, is showing the Americans, look, you can put 50% tariffs on us, but that's not going to dictate who we choose to see or don't see. Saying that, what happens behind the photographs is very, very important. First of all, China is carefully calibrating how much support it gives Moscow. And India in particular, at the same time that Narendra Modi is meeting Vladimir Putin, is limiting its purchases of oil from Russia. It's come down up to 65% this summer because of the threat of those U.S. tariffs. Mm-hmm.
I think pressure is key here, but one thing that I'm also curious to get your view on, we talk a lot about the optics, what Putin, what he could accept in terms of security guarantees, etc. I think also one point that's highlighted here from von der Leyen is what she said. There's a clear roadmap, kind of stepping on the toes here of defense also being very much a purview and a means of actually national policy. What about public perception here? I mean, tens of thousands of European troops in Ukraine. I mean, what is the public reaction in Europe? Is there support for this? How do you think they're going to take all this once it actually does materialize?
Well, again, I think Germany is a special case. I think you go back to, World War II and how Germans tried to negotiate that ever since. And the idea of German troops going in large numbers into Ukraine, that's a huge domestic issue. And that's what's happening. Now, in terms of other countries, it's going to vary from place to place. You'll know in Poland, there's a big debate about this. Poland wants to see firm defense for Ukraine. Do they want Polish forces to be part of a European force? Well, that's a big question there that you all have been discussing. That's going to play out in each individual country, and it's going to play out within the EU and within the military organizations. I think it probably comes down to this. I think if you have European forces being put into Ukraine as part of a longer term approach, and that has to be an approach in which we're talking about Ukraine coming into the European Union, it has to be an approach in which we are talking about Ukraine being at least an associate, if not a full-fledged member of NATO. I think the public can wear that, but they wear that not as European troops being involved in a war with Russia, but European troops being in Ukraine to prevent, to deter another Russian invasion. That's how I think you present it to the public, and I do think it'll have majority support if it's presented that way.
Mm. I mean, at the same time, and if we're looking at a deployment of any sort, I mean, Germany is one case, but I suppose there will also be an economic dimension to this. And how's that going to play out? I mean, moving all this logistically, I mean, some of the forces in Europe are not really at the level where they're required, even at this point in time. So what about the economic impact of scaling such a force, the logistics of such a force? How's that going to play out in Europe as well?
Well, I think it's interesting that in the past week, it's been confirmed that every member of NATO, so every one of the 32 members has now met that 2% of GDP target for defense spending that was set back in 2014, and that became headlines during the first Trump administration. So Europe has been stepping up the defense spending. The Eastern European countries like Poland have gone to 3.5%, have gone beyond 4%. I don't think we're going to be talking about Europe reaching that 5% figure of GDP spent on defense. I think that's sort of a token to appease Donald Trump. But I do think that you have seen adjustments by European economies to put investment into production, investment into support of defense forces. And I think that's being done European-wide. Or again, Ursula von der Leyen's commitment to 800 billion euros in defense investment and production over the next 5 years. Europe has been able to adjust to a number of shocks in recent years. A global recession, the pandemic, the Russian invasion. There have been sacrifices at times by Europe's populations, but Europe continues to grow economically, albeit much more slowly than we might have liked. So yeah, I actually have faith in the resilience of Europe to be able to continue to support Ukraine and to support its own people, whatever Vladimir Putin might think he wants to try to do in that ongoing effort to conquer his neighbor.
Mm-hmm. I just want to close with some brief thought here. I mean, on the one hand, we have kind of two different views here. On the one hand, von der Leyen has said there's a sense of urgency that's very high. Berlin has cautioned this. Merz has said himself, this war could last potentially for years. Which one do you think is going to be more likely reality in the near term to the long term here?
I think you do both. I mean, the reason why von der Leyen is emphasizing a sense of urgency, I think, is because of the idea we've got to lock the Americans in. You've got an extremely unpredictable, chaotic president, but you've got many people in the administration who are now working with the Europeans, and I mean at the working level, actually developing and trying to implement plans. That's von der Leyen's focus. I think the German focus is, look, this has to be planned. This has to be developed carefully with respect to all the factors that you've mentioned. We're still in a marathon, not a sprint, because the fundamental is that the Kremlin's not going to accept a ceasefire in the near future.
All right.
And if they're not going to accept a ceasefire,
we'll have to leave it. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm sure we'll discuss a bit more in the days and weeks ahead. Look, always a pleasure. Scott Lucas there. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks here on TVP World. But stay tuned, much more is coming up right here, so don't go away. Goodbye.